Hello, my name is Cody C. Engdahl. I am the author of four novels, soon to be the author of six novels, and I have two non-fiction works as well available on Amazon. If you're interested in my work, check out the link in the description below. And before we even get started, please give me a like, a um, and comment. If you comment, I mean, I don't get any comments. So if you comment, I'm probably going to have plenty of time to reply to it, unless you're really mean. But and Also share this out. I'm sorry, my opening is still unscripted, and I'm going that way. I mean, this is a very unscripted channel. What am I doing with this? Okay, so here is the deal. I'll make this quick. I am an author and I do not claim to be an expert in book marketing and publishing or even writing, but I've been very successful. I'm still climbing that mountain. I sell books all over the world. I'm very happy with the results so far. I'm still building and trying to get to uh, the place where I want to be. Which in the end, there really is no end to the mountain. One of my favorite stories is about a famous Chilean cellist, and he was 92 years old, and he was being interviewed, and the interviewer asked, "Why are you still practicing?" And he said, "Well, because I'm making progress." So anyway, what is the purpose of my channel? Well, I'm on a path. I'm on a road. And one of the things I've learned about the writing community, which first of all, I've learned that it's very, very kind. Like I have learned that authors who are way ahead of me, on my level, and below me are all very kind and mutually helpful people. I mean, all things are competitive, I guess, but I really don't think in this world it's not a zero sum game. You cannot possibly write enough books to satisfy a reader for the rest of that person's life. You want to keep people reading. It's great that there are other authors and that people read. I read multiple authors. I have some that are my favorites that I've read nearly everything they've written. Some that I'm discovering now, and anyway, this channel is all about the journey. My successes, my mistakes, and what I'm learning from them. I concentrating a lot on the marketing side of it. So let's get started. The topics I picked today, and by the way, I'm going to try to do this once a week. And also, if you're an author and you're interested in coming on, I don't have a big audience just yet. I'm trying to build this up. If I wanted a big audience right away, I could do this on Facebook because I do have over 3,000 followers there. But I want to build up my YouTube presence. So I put a link on Facebook. Every once in a while do get some people over from there. Most of the people that would probably come on are asleep by now. But if you're an author and you want to come on my show, or just about anybody, I would let you on and we could talk about things. What we're going to talk about today is I went to Dragon Con, and I will say this: I would say I'm not fully a geek and not fully a normie either. I mean, just like everything, so I'm kind of a centrist. I'm comic book adjacent. I have friends that are really big into comic books, namely Jack Scott, who I worked at Channel 4 in Detroit with, and who I went to a Dragon Con with. I follow a lot of comic book people on YouTube just because I like listening to them rant. And listen to the whole culture war thing about the changes that are happening in our movies and comics and things like that. And I've liked them. I liked superheroes when I was a kid. I wasn't really big into them. I was more into knights and swords and samurais, and I mean the things I'm into now. Right, I was more into historical stuff. And I like Star Wars. I'm a fan of the original series, the original trilogy. I wasn't crazy about the prequels. The story of Anakin was interesting to me. I didn't think the execution was great, and the sequels that Disney did, I just thought got worse and worse. I watched the first one; it was okay. It felt like they were just redoing the original movie, but it's a girl now. And then I watched The Last Jedi, and I was like, okay, I'm done, and I'm done with this. I never watched The Rise of Skywalker. I did really like Rogue One though, and I part of it is I think I because I read the the book that leads up to that, and I thought the whole story was great. So anyway, all that to say is that uh, I'm not a big comic book geek culture guy, but I do like it and know it enough that I would say that I'm on the periphery. I guess. Well, I got a viewer. Thank you very much. Um, so my friend Jack, Jack and I go back into the '90s when I was a video producer at Channel 4 in Detroit, and Jack was a video editor, and uh, and so we worked on a lot of projects together, and we became good friends. We used to go out to Mexican restaurants a lot in downtown. We used to go to Tiger games. Jack is he's a comic book expert. And when in the mid 90s or the early 2000s, or I would say the mid 2000s, actually, kind of my second career in Detroit, my second time around in television, he got me started collecting comic books. Now, at that point, I'm like in my 30s, but we would go every Wednesday, and that's comic book day. So all the new titles come in. The comic book stores usually run like a 10, 15%, maybe 20% discount. So it was fun. And he got me started reading comics. For about a year, I collected them, and I did enjoy them. And I do respect it as a storytelling I guess not genre, but I guess a delivery system. It's very visual. It's visual storytelling, which is interesting. I think one of the reasons why they do so many films that are based off of comic books now is because I heard this about with like the 300 and Sin City. It's because the comic book, the storyboard's already made. You can just open it up and see shot by shot how to put your movie together. So all that to say, I enjoy this stuff. I do like geek culture. I like science fiction. I think after historical fiction, I like science fiction, fantasy, and horror next. And so Dragon Con, I'll back up a little bit. Jack was like, "Hey, he now lives in Atlanta. He works at I think he's a creative service director at Channel 11, which is the NBC affiliate in Atlanta." And he's like, "Hey, I'll get you press passes, from the station. We can go for free. All you gotta do is just drive to Atlanta." And Laura said, "That's a good idea because I admit I'm a little bit of a hermit. Nobody believes this because when I'm out and I'm around people, I seem to be very outgoing and loquacious, and but my preference is to be alone." To hide in my house. And Laura doesn't want to live that way, and I love her too much to disappoint her and let her find her happiness elsewhere. So I am also trying to get out more, and we went out last night, had a great time, saw my friend Pablo Garcon, but we're talking about Dragon Con. So so I said, yeah, let's do that. So the plan is that on last Thursday, I drove to Atlanta, got to his place, we had a few drinks, ate, and then got up the next day and rode the MARTA, which is the public trans, to the Dragon Con. It had a great time. So what is Dragon Con? It's one thing I think is really funny about geeks and geek cultures. What is a geek? A geek or a nerd or whatever you want to call them is usually someone very intelligent that lacks social skills. And one of the things that I think that defines geekdom, and I am certainly a geek, especially when it comes to this stuff. I guess you call me a history and military geek, is that we tend to obsess about something. So it could be like my friend Forrest Sanders. He's a horror geek. He's got all these. He knows every single horror film. He's got memorabilia. He's got T-shirts for every single horror movie. Jack Scott, my friend, he's a comic book geek. In particular, he is. And geeks can be very exact and very specialized. Like Jack is a comic book geek. But more specifically, he is a Flash geek, and more specifically, he is a Barry Allen, because apparently there were three main characters that were the Flash. But Dragon Con is interesting because, as a geek will tell you, it is not a Comic Con. It is a Comic Con plus. So comic books are a big part of it, but it is a overall. So I guess a lot of comic book conventions are concentrated on it's just comic books. This is something that invites all things. So you have comic book fans, you have science, both movies and the comic books, fantasy fans. Yeah, there are a lot of people with elves ears on, things like that. Science fiction fans, and role playing games and video games. Was there a lot of video game? I don't think there was a lot of. There might have been. You probably could, if you wanted to buy a video game, you probably could find them there. But I don't know if they concentrated on that. But mostly like comics, science fiction, fantasy, role playing game, that kind of stuff. And I like that stuff. I played Dungeons and Dragons as a kid. I would love to play it as an adult. There's a way to do it online, and there are local groups. I just haven't taken the time to. I don't know, frankly, if I do have the time to do it, but I love that stuff. I played that in Star Frontiers and what else? I played Force Recon, which was like a Vietnam-based game, and Car Wars, a bunch of different things. But anyway, so we went, and I thought it would be a good experience for me. And I told Jack, like he's like, well, you might want to do this or do that. I'm like, Jack, I really don't care. Like, I just want to walk around, and it's all like, I don't need to have my own agenda. So whatever you want to do, I'll just follow you around. And that's what I did. But the other thing is that because I do, one part of my geekdom is Civil War, and I do Civil War shows where I get, a booth and I sell books. It was interesting to take this in as because there's a lot of lateral things or overlapping things, because it's just the audience is a little different. But the Civil War audience, who are geeks like me, can be similar, and there's even some overlap with the comic book science fiction crowd. And I will tell you that I found this is really interesting. The LeMat pistol, which was a pistol that was invented during the Civil War. It was, I think the company was half owned by PTG Beauregard, and that's why they got the contract with the Confederacy. And it, just a long story short, it was a unique pistol because it had, I think it was a 36 caliber revolver, but it had a barrel underneath the pistol barrel that was basically a 20 gauge shotgun. So it's a handheld 20 gauge shotgun underneath the pistol barrel. So you could shoot nine shots, 36 calibers. And these are ones where you had to put in the black powder and the ball and press it in and put the primer caps on. And then you had a separate barrel. Kind of an interesting weapon. And I think because it's so unique and that is popular. And so I saw 3 replicas of the LeMat pistol from the American Civil War at Dragon Con. So I thought, so that was fun. It was a wonderful day. I will say this, that the biggest of all the things we did, and I'll real quickly, we spent the first part of the day just going through the vendor building. So there was like 4 floors of booths, and there were people selling memorabilia. They were selling comic books, costumes, fantasy weapons, all that. We went to where all the celebrities are, went and saw some of those guys and gals. And then I think we went to a place where they had game playing, like tables for role playing games, anything from Dungeons and Dragons to like these World War II map games where they had like a map spread out, and they had one that was Pacific Theater where they had guys and gals with like battleships plotted out. It was like a big "you sunk my battleship" kind of game. He said, but wasn't blind. And they also had one where it was like a map that was land that had like model tanks, and one team were the Germans, the other was, so it was interesting stuff. And then what else? I think there was one place where it was artists, not necessarily there. Well, on the vendors, there was on the top floor, it was the actual comic book artists that were for like DC and Marvel Comics, and there were some famous people there that I got to meet that I thought was really interesting. And but there was another building or place that we went that had artists that weren't so much illustrators for comic books. They were just artists in general that had booths that were selling paintings and they had really beautiful things, you know, and a lot of fantasy kind of and horror and things like that. But okay, so those are all the things we done. I don't know if I forgot anything. On the role playing game floor, they had some uh, free pinball machines, and I actually played a game of pinball, and I did probably the best game I ever played. But the biggest thing to me, the biggest joy of the whole thing that made it, it's not the vendors, not the celebrities. We didn't see any of these seminars because there was a lot of seminars too and talks you could go to. It was the attendees themselves. It was the people that came. It was the best people watching ever. It was I mean everywhere. I mean, I'm talking men, women, there were families that brought their kids. They were very older people that were doing what they call cosplay. And if you're not, cosplay, I think means costume play. Basically, what it is that they dress up like their favorite characters. It could be an anime, which is Japanese cartoons, an anime character, a superhero from the comic books or from the movies or from Star Wars, a lot of Star Wars. And it was just wonderful. And there were people of every race. There are white people, black people, Hispanics, Asian, Arabs, East Indians. Everybody was there. Everybody was, not everybody, but all of them were dressing up. I mean, like everywhere you looked, it was some of the costumers were like just kind of thrown together and weird. Some of them were like, holy cow, like they were walking right out of the movie. If you see the thumbnail for this, I took a picture with Chewbacca and whoever was being. I mean, it was like Chewbacca. I mean, of course, it wasn't the original actor, but whoever it was in that costume was like probably wearing stilts because like 7, 8 feet tall. It had the Chewbacca voice. I don't know how they were doing it. And I took I saw Chewbacca and walked up and said, Chewie, can I take a picture with you? And it was perfect, just like the movie. It was like Chewbacca from the movie. And Jack took the picture, and it's great. And the joke was because Chewbacca has these really furry hands, and he put his hand out, and I was like, you know, because I'm bald back there, I'm like, man, that's the most hair I've had on the top of my head in a long time. But I guess what, and of course the girls. I mean, I'll admit I'm girl crazy. I'm kind of a creep. All the beautiful girls, and when I mean beautiful, like they don't have to be like models. In fact, I have a thing for plain looking girls too, of all shapes and sizes, but dressed up in these very, you know, very alluring costumes that just had my eyes popping out of my head, like Jack, look at her, oh my God, look what she's. So it was wonderful. So I was ogling the ones that wanted to be ogled, not the ones that didn't. And just enjoying the thing. And this is what I love about it. And this is this is what I learned. And I guess we're circling back to why I'm, you know, this whole channel is me talking about the business. Oh, Brian Riley. Hey, Cody, I'm actually interested in your process of writing a book since you're a book writing machine. Thank you. Brian, we'll get to that. I'll bring that up. Anyway, this is what I want to say about it is that when you're a writer, and Brian, this is something to take into account. These are your people. Like when you write, and there's a lot of people who have the wrong idea. Like, I want to write my novel. Well, yeah, you put yourself in your novel, and you got to write something you're passionate about. But you got to think about who you're writing it for. You got to think about the person dressed up like a Wookiee who's going to wait 2 hours in line to get into Dragon Con, and the girl who's putting on the you know, the Princess Leia slave outfit because she just loves it and wants to live a day like that. The people dressed up like there was a Homelander there, and I realized, and this is something I started from the very beginning when I wrote Rampage on the River. It's for everybody, and I've had people, I've men, women of all ages and races buy it all over the world and like it. But when I wrote it for the like the 12 to 16-year-old boy that I was, I wrote the book that I wanted to read back then. And it's an adult book. It's got like swearing in it, and there's violence and there's sexual uh, situations. But looking at this and seeing, I mean, we saw two old ladies, like really old ladies, like they were probably in their 80s. And no offense if you're in your 80s, because I'm getting close myself. But what I'm saying is, like, one was in a walker. They were old ladies. They were dressed up like witches, and they were so cute. They were so excited to be there. And you know what makes them excited is because it's the inner child. And I'm really beginning to embrace this. Because it's the little boy. War. I write books about war. War's terrible, right? Of course. My books, even though they're historically accurate, and my depictions of the violent is realistic, it's also very romanticized, and I get that because I'm writing to the little boy in me that played with wooden swords and plastic tanks and all those things. And so I think that uh, when you write whatever genre you're writing, think about those people standing in line uh, in the 90-degree heat, dressed up like a Wookiee. Some 36-year-old dressed up like a Wookiee in Atlanta, standing in line for 2 hours to get in. I don't think it was that bad, but it was a long line. I mean, I couldn't believe it. It was like it wound around, it went back and forth around the block and through. It was amazing. It was amazing how everybody just behaved well. I didn't see any cutting. And once they opened up, it moved pretty fast. It's because these are adults, especially the geeks, who are in touch with their inner child. And it doesn't mean be immature, like you should be responsible, and well, even children should behave well, right? So, uh, but you should not only embrace your own inner child, and be kind to the inner child that's inside you. But if you're a writer or you do anything creative, think about, even if you're not writing children's novels, think about the inner child that you're writing to, even if it's a 76-year-old man who loves Civil War novels. And so that's what I try to do, because I know that I get really excited about things that I'm a little boy. I'm a middle-aged man, but there's a little boy in me who gets excited. Like, for example, I mean, the joke was, Laura's not going to let me wear my French uniform when we go to see Napoleon. Now, I don't have one, but I wish I did, because the little boy in me wants to dress up like a French Napoleonic soldier and fire off cannons. I love that stuff. So that's my big takeaway with Dragon Con. I'll say the other thing of note is that I got to see some of the celebrities. I saw Gil Gerard, who was Buck Rogers, and I felt kind of weird because Jack was like, "Hey, check it out, it's Buck Rogers," and I'm like, "Oh my God, it's Gil Gerard!" And he looked up at me, and he didn't have a line or anything. He just looked at me, and I just looked at him and blinked, and then he just kind of shrugged and nodded to me, and I nodded to him, and then I walked away. I'm like, God, I'm so stupid. I could have talked to him. So later on, I tried to go up to talk to him because I already felt stupid for being starstruck, and just to say to him, and I think he's in his 80s, like, "Hey, I just want to let you know, thank you for the great childhood," because I actually liked, I went to see the original Star Wars when it came to the theater multiple times. I never had any of the toys, but my friends did. We played with the toys. I saw watched Buck Rogers on TV, Battlestar Galactica, and the Flash Gordon that came out in 1980, which I think the Flash Gordon of 1980 is probably my favorite space fantasy movie of all time. I think it's better than Star Wars. Sorry if you think that's sacrilegious. But even as a kid, when I played like space, I was more playing in the Buck Rogers universe than I was in the Star Wars one. Star Wars is fine, but I was more of a Buck Rogers kid. And I like Buck Rogers and Flash Gordon more. I think it's because I've always been nostalgic. And even though I wasn't aware of the 1930s version of those two things, I was still, especially like Flash Gordon, even though they made it in 1980, it had a lot of that 1930s science fiction campiness that was built into the set designs. And it's a ridiculous movie, but it's a movie that knows it's ridiculous and it's having a great time. It's Dino De Laurentiis that and everything he does is just over the top and wonderful. So there's that. Okay, so I got Brian Riley here. You are interested in the process of writing a book. Yes. And thank you about calling it a book writing machine. First of all, and I'm going to give it to you here for free. And Brian, if you have any questions, reach out to me. You can always call me. Send me a message. I'll give my phone number, and I can help you. I have people that I've coached and all that stuff. I do it for free. I don't ask anybody for any kind of consultant fees. I got a funny circular logic about that, but I have a book. If you look me up on Amazon, it's called something along the lines of, well, let's see, let's do this. Hopefully you're still here. Let's see, present arms. We're going to share a screen, and yeah, let's go here. Okay, so let me just make sure I'm sharing my screen. No, I'm not sharing my screen. How do I share my screen? Let's see. Add to stream. There we go. Okay. I'm sharing my screen. Okay, now I have this one prepared because, I'm buying some jeans. Thanks God I'm not buying anything embarrassing. But I have a book. It's relatively cheap. And everything in the book I'll tell you for free anyway. But it's might be something to have next to you while you write. It's let's see. Let's let this load here. It is called. Here it is. It's both in Kindle. And if you don't actually have a Kindle, you can download the app onto your laptop, your iPhone, or whatever, and you can read it that way. Or you can buy you can buy a print copy of the book as well. Like I said, I did it. It's basically I sell it as a lead loss, meaning it's got good information in it. It's not very long, but it's very concise. It's not going to bore you with a bunch of anecdotes and no, it just gets right down to the process. This is how to write, publish, and market your novel, a brief, no nonsense guide. And it's exactly that, which is funny because I think somebody bitched about it being short, and it's like, yeah, this is a ripoff. This is just a pamphlet with zero useful information. Well, the only thing I think is wrong with that is zero. There's plenty of useful information, but it's just look, dude, it says right here. It says right here, a brief, no nonsense guide, right? And also it says right here, it's 49 pages. Okay. And it, and on top of all that, it's only, how come I can't see the price here? It's only $3.99 for a paperback version, and I believe it's $1.99 if you buy the digital version. And guess what? If a $2 is still a ripoff, I give it away for free every 90 days. The only thing is you just got to pay attention. And the reason why I do it, this is not a book that I designed to make a lot of money or make any money. It is what they call a lead loss. And what it is that at the back of the book is a preview for my first novel, Rampage on the River, because I think there's about 6 chapters to this. And then I said, hey, if you want to see how this works, go, the product of this, this method that I use, here's a sample of my first book, and you can buy that. So my hope is that some people who get this for free or for, pretty cheap, $2 for digital, $4 for a print, that you might turn around and buy book 1 of my series, and then you like book 1 so much you read the whole series. That's the trick. That's the ripoff, right? So someone saying this a ripoff because whether they paid $2 or $4 and they didn't read the title that said it was brief, and they didn't look in the description that says it's 49 pages. Come on, man. All right. So what was this? This was it started off as a blog post. Now I took the blog down because I'm not going to ask for money for something that I have up for free. So I took the blog down, but I had a series of articles about writing, and each, and I think I did one a week 1 year. And once I got done writing all the articles, I said, you know what, I'm going to put this all together, re-edit it, and turn it into a book, a brief no nonsense guide, a pamphlet, as this guy said. It's a little more than a pamphlet, okay? But anyway, so and then the chapters are each of the articles that I did. So the first chapter is ideas, how to come up with an idea of what you want to write, where to find ideas, thinking both something that, I mean, when you write a novel, you're basically gonna be living this novel from 6 months to a year, 2 years, depends on how long you write. And then preparation, where I talk about outlining. In writing, we talk about there's this kind of continuum that people talk about amongst the writing community of plotters and pantsers. Plotters are people who plot out their books first and then start writing. Pantsers fly by the seat of their pants, in which they just sit down and just start writing. Good example of a pantser would be J.R. Martin, who doesn't really have an ending or a structure in mind when he starts. He just starts writing. And usually pantsers write very character-driven stories in which the character kind of drives the plot and they just see where it goes. I'm more of a plotter. I always believe, first of all, that you're not one or the other. We're always on a continuum. So on the continuum between plotter and pantsers, I'm somewhere in between, closer to a plotter. So I write out an outline, but it's a very loose outline. When I start my novel, I usually know how it's going to end, how it's going to begin, and the things I want to have happen in the middle. And then I start with a rough outline. And then as I'm writing, I'm always updating my outline and changing things or adding things so that the book is never exactly what I had in mind in the beginning. It turns into something better. But because I know where the book is going, I feel like I have very satisfying ends. Like, I'm reading a book right now, and I won't say who it is, or because it's someone I like, and I generally like their writing, but the book doesn't seem to have any real plot. It's just kind of like a series of events. It's part of a series, and meaning there are multiple books in the series, but then in each book is kind of like just picking up this person at this part of their life and having kind of these episodes along the way until the end of the book, where there wasn't like an overall plot. And I think some people really enjoy that. And I mean, there are very successful and famous writers that write that way. My stories tend to have an overlying plot. There's always a dual plot with me. There's always the historical plot, which usually ends with a big battle, but then there's also my character has a plot as well that's interwoven into the real history. That's how I write. Write to your reader. Write to your reader with WRITE, right, and then write to your reader, RIGHT. That was kind of the same stuff I was talking about when we were talking about Dragon Con and thinking about your reader. One of the things that I do is I try to remember that even though thousands of people read my books, everybody is alone when they read, meaning there's only one person in that mind that's reading the book and processing it, right? So when you're writing, you're always, even though you hope that you have millions of readers, each reader is an individual person, right, reading your book. So you're writing to an individual. You got to think about that. And you're writing to someone who's creating the theater of the mind, as it were. And one of the things I try to do, the naturalists will have, like, they'll try to describe everything. I subscribe to the philosophy is do not describe anything unless it's important to the plot. Or sometimes if you want to give some texture and feel, that's great, because you don't want to have white room syndrome either. But allow your reader to be able to construct most of it on their own because they're creative. It's reading the relationship between a writer and a reader is a creative collaborative partnership because I am providing the story, but the reader is creating it visually in their minds. See what I'm saying? That's why almost everybody fundamentally says the book is better than the movie because they imagined it different. So when they and almost everybody's going to be disappointed because when you go see the movie, it may not look. I'll give a perfect example, and this is one where there is description. I never liked the little. I couldn't get into the Last Kingdom, which is that Viking Anglo-Saxon show. Bernard Cornwell is one of my favorite writers, and I love the series. I read the whole series, but the way Uhtred is described in the books and is not how it's in the show. And it drives me crazy and it takes me out of the show because it's not really how the books are. It's close. The only thing I will say though is that the guy who played Alfred the Great was magnificent. And while he was on the show, it was very worth watching, but eventually I dropped it. Editing. My method of editing, especially if you're an independent, you can't afford a big shot editor. I have some suggestions. I do a lot of editing as I write. Publishing, I'm published through Amazon KDP, so I talk about that. But there's people that do traditional publishing. I got some thoughts on that, and then marketing on Amazon and social media marketing. I could probably go back and update some of that because you're welcome, Brian. I'm just now getting back to where I can see the comments there. So I will tell you this about my process, and there's more in the book. And of course, you can always send me a message, and we can talk on the phone, whatever that helps. But I write down. I definitely write down an outline of. And I usually use, I think it's called the Harvard outline, Roman numeral, letter A. Sometimes I just do dashes. But I know how the book starts. I know how it ends. Sometimes if I'm stuck or I have a scene pop in my head, I might write a scene in advance and put it to the side. And I usually write in a linear fashion, but every once in a while, like my main character, Carl, I've already written his death. And I don't want to give too much away of when that's going to happen, whether it's in the book I'm writing now, or if it's 20 books from now, but I already know how he dies. That's kind of tucked away for when I need it. But even the last book, Mexico My Love, some of the scenes were written early and then set aside. So, and there's some scenes, I've written some scenes that are going to go into books like 2 or 3 books from now. But if I'm like, I'm feeling it now and I don't want to forget this, I'll write it down. Otherwise, I write in a linear fashion. One of the things, this is not in this book, but this is a new thing I do because I've had a lot of writer's block with the current novel I'm working on now, is on Sunday I started working on plotting and I try to think the next 5 things. Because each of those 5 things is something I can work on each of the 5 work weeks. I try to write. It depends. I have a part-time job, some side work, a part-time job that's sometimes 80 hours a week, and me living in hotels for 10 days at a time. But outside of that, I try to write Monday through Friday and use Saturday and Sunday for editing, because I edit as I go. But basically what I try to do is I try to do a minimum of 500 words a day. It's not a lot. 500 words is just about a scene for me, the way I write. My scenes are, 500-600 words. I think my chapters, I try to keep them. I think I land around 3,000 words as an average for my chapters. I think it's actually, there's something to be said about short chapters because people will read, if you have big long chapters and people, they're reading at night, like, oh God, this chapter's 30 pages. I'll start it later. That might stop them from reading. But if you have shorter breaks along the way, shorter stopping periods, they might actually read faster because if your chapters are only like 2,000 words, for example, they get done with a chapter like, oh, it's 10:30 at night. I think I can start another chapter. So you might get them to read through quicker. Um, but 500 words a day doesn't seem like a lot. That's just a minimum. That doesn't mean I go 499, 500, I'm done for the day. No, I just try to get 500 words in. And sometimes, especially like when you're cold and it's hard to get started, well, if you only have to write 500 words, then you can do that. You can do anybody can write 500 words in a day. And a lot of times, by the time you hit 500 words, you're warmed up, you're hot, you're ready to go. So sometimes 500 words turns into a 200 or 2,000 word day. I know there are some people out there um, who write 2,000 words in a day. I know this. I saw a graph of like famous authors and what their daily word counts, and a lot of them are 500 to 1,000 words a day. Very few of them are writing more than that. A lot, you'd be surprised. It's consistency, because if you think about it, so your average novel, I think the Goldilocks size of a novel is about 80,000 words. So if you write 500 words a day, and if you stay, and you'll never write just 500, you'll end up writing 600, 800, 1,200. But if you write 500 words a day at the bare minimum, that's 2,500 words a week. That's pretty much a chapter, at least my chapters. That is in 6 months. That's about 10,000 words a month. That's like 60,000 words in 6 months. That's almost a novel. I mean, Rampage on the River is only 56,000 words. So you could, if you're getting out a book every year, you could do that. So you spend, 6 to 8 months writing it, about 2 months of editing, and then you publish, and then you start moving on to the next one. So I think that's a very good system. And then my method is, like I said, I do plot, but my plot loosely, and I plot in a way so that there is some pantsing. There are some things that come to me as I'm writing that may change the course of my plot. So I'm willing to go back into my outline and change things around. When I sit down and each day to write, the first thing I do is I read what I wrote the night before or the day before. And that's kind of my first revision, because if I see things I don't like, or mistakes or typos or whatever, I'll fix them on the fly. So that's kind of the first pass of editing, right? Then I write. Now, one of the things I do, the hardest thing to do about writing, I've said this for years, even before I started writing the novels I'm writing now. I had a few false starts in trying to write a book before. Is the hardest thing about writing is sitting down and writing. And boy, don't I know it. I mean, even today, I had a lot of time, and I was just finding every possible thing I could do other than writing. So I can't remember the name of this, and I did not come up with it. I think I actually read this originally in a Japanese novel, but I do this work cycle, and it's basically, you can adjust it to whatever works for you. But the basic version of it is 90 minutes of work, 20 minutes of rest. 90 minutes work. So if you're, when you're an author, you have to be self-motivated. You're working for yourself. If you say I'm gonna write for 8 hours straight, you'll kill yourself. But you can write for 90 minutes. And if that is too long, I find that cutting in half and doing 45 minutes of work with 10 minutes off. I've seen some people go as low as 25 with 5 minutes off. I've done 25-minute work sessions. Those are good for like really hardcore concentrating. I usually find that's not enough. I usually find that I start looking at the clock and getting fatigued after about 45 minutes to 50 minutes. So like today, I wrote about a little over, I think 613 words or something like that. I finished chapter 19. I had one work session, a 90-minute work session. I spent actually half of it practicing my fiddle, because I'm playing a dance in October that I'm trying to, get ahead of, because I challenged myself with some of the tune selections. And then spent 45 minutes on the book, took a break, had lunch, and then came back, had another 90-minute session. When the timer went off on that, I was rolling. I was hot. So I was like, I'm not stopping, because I could see the light at the end of the tunnel because I was finishing chapter 19 that I had struggled with quite a bit, because a lot of my writing requires research on the fly. I do general research beforehand, of course, but there's so many little intricate things you need to know all along the way that you don't know you need to know until you need to know them. So I burned through, and I worked past the 90 minutes, and sure enough, I think that's a good idea if you're able to do it. But you can do 90 minutes on, 20 minutes off. Anybody can do that and stay focused. And if you know that you only have to work for 90 minutes, you're more likely to stay focused and on task than if you're like, I'm going to work for 8 hours and like, but I'm going to check my email and I wonder what's going on with Facebook right now. So that's kind of it. The second pass through is once I finish with a chapter, like I finished one today, and I usually try to put some time. So if I finish a chapter on one day, I do the another edit of it the next day. So tomorrow I finished chapter 19, which is called Into the Woods, and it's about 3,000 words. And so tomorrow I'll put it through its paces. So what I'll do is I'll run spell check through it, then I'll read it out loud. And reading out loud, sometimes it looks okay when you're reading it to yourself, but when you read it out loud, you'll hear things that like, oh, that sounds wordy. That sounds kind of clunky. I need to smooth that out. Brian says, I don't know if this is an issue, but my directing background helps me with pacing and structure. Absolutely, Brian, but leads to shorter chapters and less flowery imagery. Okay, so a couple things with that. Absolutely. And in fact, I know that not only am I a person who have probably seen more movies and read books, but my audience as well. So it's okay. So I think using a visual medium such as television shows and movies is a perfect way, because like I said, you're writing to an audience, you're writing to readers. So you gotta, and I think it's very narcissistic. Like, no, I'm just writing my inner deep art and I don't care if people like it or not. Okay, fine. But that's just, intellectual masturbation when you could be writing things that really mean something. There's a fine line. There's a Goldilocks between your vision and writing something that's marketable, and that people will actually like and enjoy. And so, yes, I think that that's fine. Using that kind of pacing and storytelling you get from directing. Shorter chapters is a good thing. And I've heard a lot talk about this. And like I said, I think really a good, what's that guy? Kurt Vonnegut writes really short chapters. Some of his chapters are half a page long. Now that's an extreme. Some people write chapters that are like 30,000 words. That's an extreme too. I write about my pacing because my chapters, I try to make each of my chapter be like an episode of Netflix. My chapters are, and so each chapter is part of the overall story, but each chapter is kind of like an episode on an episode on Netflix, on a Netflix streaming service. So, but I read an article that said that people like shorter chapters. I think 1,200 to 2,000 words is a really nice place to be with chapters. Shorter chapters keeps them reading. Like I said, if you're presenting them with long chapters, people might not get through your book because, oh, this chapter is 30 pages. I'll wait. But if the chapter is relevant, I'm like, yeah, I can read this. And guess what happens? They read that chapter and like, I think I'll read the next one too. Alexander Dumas wrote the Musketeers and Count of Monte Cristo. Wrote short chapters. It was basically a serial that was published in the Parisian newspapers. So I think do not be embarrassed with short chapters. I'm actually working on shorter books. My last two books are 124,000 words and 119,000 words. I want to get closer to 80,000. I think that sometimes, like for example, I want to read War and Peace, but it's a huge book. I don't know if I want to be bogged down reading that. But a good, 80,000 word book, 300 page, that's something that is I can take in, and I think people get bored. So I think it's better to write shorter books. I would say anywhere between like 60,000 to 90,000 is where you want to be, with 80,000 being that just that sweet spot. So don't worry about short chapters. And also less flowery imagery. Now, there's a lot of debate on this, but if you read, just go look at some of your favorite authors, and uh, a lot of them, like if you read, let's take Stephen King for example, because a lot of people have read him, and I haven't read his earlier stuff in a long time, but I have read some of his recent stuff. He writes very short sentences, and he writes. There's not a lot of flowery writing, and not a lot of adjectives and adverbs, not a lot of descriptors. And it goes back to what I was saying, is that this is really a collaborative partnership with your reader. Your reader has a mind that will construct the things. You just have to give them enough material for them to do the rest in their head. There's a Goldilocks place, because you don't want white room syndrome, in which it just appears that your characters are talking in an empty white room. You want to give just enough, just enough. You don't want to bog them down with details. You just want enough to set the scene, give texture, and and of course, if it's important to the plot, certain facial features or certain things that will come to play later on in your novel. I know I talk too much, but I would say that yes, using film and television as kind of a pacer is an excellent way to write books, because your readers have almost assuredly have seen more TV shows and more movies than they read books. And that's even people who read books all the time. So that's fine. Short chapters are great, and less flowery imagery is actually good. It's good. Sternk White, the little book of Elements of Style, written in 1913, says that, which is really funny because it's a very flowery way of saying don't be flowery. But he said that adverbs and adjectives are the leeches in the ponds of good prose. Thanks, Brian. I'm happy to give that info, and that's what I'm trying to do with this channel, and of course that book. If you're interested in the book, let me pull that back up, by the way, so you can see it. There we go. That's the book right there. $4 for a print, $2 for the Kindle. If you wait, it'll be free at some point for 5 days. What was the last thing I want to talk about? Oh yeah, I got some chicken, so I'm gonna get off here real pretty soon. The current update: I just finished chapter 19 of my novel, The Prussian Prince. One of the things I did that I'm very happy about was, originally it was going to be partially in the Austro-Prussian War, partially in the Franco-Prussian War. I realized I had multiple endings, and I was going to do it in 2 parts. And I realized it was going to be another 120,000 plus word. And I'm really writing 2 books here. Why am I doing that? I don't think it's a good business to write. I think some authors think about word count as like a cock measuring contest, like you're not a real author unless you write really big long books. But the truth is that your readers don't want to be bogged down reading Shogun and War and Peace every time they pick up a novel. And so give them something that's consumable, not too short, right? But just a nice Goldilocks thing. And the thing is, if you write shorter novels, and especially if you're writing a successful series in which you're getting good read through, and I'm fortunate that I do that, my 4 novels are part of a series, and all 4 of the books sell. That means people are reading book 1 and they're liking it, and they're coming back and they're buying book 2 and they're liking that, and they're reading all the way up through book 4. So I think it's better to put out more books that are shorter. I'm not saying short books, but just more manageable than putting out big, huge tomes. I think frequency wise, My goal is to have a book out anywhere between, I think the shortest time, and even this is too short, is 6 months between books, and I still think that's too short. I think the 6 months to 2 years. So I think you got, when you write your first, Brian, when you write your first book, they always say it takes your entire life to write your first book, but you better write that next book within a year or so. And once you, and it doesn't end. You don't write one book and you just become this famous author, and you get to pick out what color helicopter you want. You got to, writing the book is half the work. The other half is all the marketing that happens. And guess what? That's what we're doing right now. This is marketing. I think I'd like to have a book out every calendar year. I think about 9 months to a year and a half is good. I've decided that, with the book I have right now, I mean, because I've broken it into 2 books, it's going to come out a little sooner than it might have, but I'm still taking my time. I'm on pace right now to probably have it out in the beginning of 24. That's what I'm hoping for. I'm really enjoying it though. The big battle is the Battle of Konigratz, and all my other books, the big battles are usually like 2 chapters. This one I'm really going deep into, and I think I've already written 4 chapters that is on the big ending battle, Konigratz, and I think they'll end up being 6 chapters on the battle itself, and then at least a chapter afterwards of some of the consequences of what happened in the battle, and what happens with my main character, and some resolution of his plot. And then denouement, which is going to kind of wrap everything up and tease the next book. And I already have some, now that I broke this into 2 books, now the next book can have its own plot that's going to be very interesting, and it all ties into everything that, if you've read my books, everything I've read already. So Brian, thanks for joining me. I see I got 2 viewers right now. Thank you, other person. If you would, please give me a like, subscribe to my channel. It does not mean you got to watch every video. It'll just show up if you look at your subscriptions. If I got a new video up, I'm going to try to do this once a week. But the more subscribes, okay, absolutely, Brian. I look forward to working with you. But yeah, give me a subscription, give me a like. If you want, you can share it. I don't share other people's videos unless there's something very particular about it. So I'm not asking you to do things I don't do myself. But if you want to, you can share it. And I'll tell you this: the hardest thing about writing is sitting down and writing, and you just gotta start. Man, that's what happened. One day, I said, you know what? I've been talking about that one day I'm going to write books, and I've been talking about it all my life. And if I don't start now, I'm never going to get started. So I got started, and I wrote Rampage on the River, and I haven't stopped since. So anyway, I love you guys. Take care. Start writing, and I'll talk to you guys soon.